Welcome to the Survival Horror Ambience channel. If you like horror and horror stories, subscribe and hit the like button. Tell me in the comments what types of horror stories and movies you enjoy. Now to the stories. Oh, and happy nightmares. Chapter 1. Dawn of the Plague. The world lay in ruins, a haunting echo of its former glory. Once vibrant cities now stood as silent monuments to the devastation wrought by the plague. Streets that once bustled with life now lay deserted, reclaimed by nature's relentless grasp. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a grim reminder of the horrors that had occurred to humanity. In this desolation, a disparate group of survivors struggled to find an existence. Among them was Sarah, her weary eyes a testament to the countless lives she had tried to save as a nurse before the world fell apart. Beside her stood John, his stoic demeanor betraying the pain of losing his family to the merciless tide of infection. And then there was Emily, a child of the apocalypse, her innocence stolen by the cruelty of fate. Their numbers were few, their stories as varied as the scars that marred their souls. Each survivor bore the weight of their tragedy, their pasts woven together by the common thread of survival. As days stretched into weeks and weeks into months, the group found themselves bound by a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of adversity. They learned to trust one another, to rely on each other's strengths in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet beneath the veneer of camaraderie, tensions simmered, fueled by the constant struggle for survival. David, a man weathered by hardship and loss, emerged as their de facto leader. His voice carried weight, his words a beacon of hope in a world consumed by darkness. It was he who called the meeting that fateful night, his eyes ablaze with determination as he addressed the weary faces gathered around the flickering campfire. "We cannot continue to wander, drifting like leaves on the wind," David declared, his voice grave with purpose. "If we are to stand any chance against the tide of infection, we must unite as one. We must cast aside our differences and face this threat together." Sarah, her gaze hardened by the harsh realities of their existence, nodded in agreement. "He's right. We can't keep fighting each other and expect to survive out here." John, his jaw clenched in silent resolve, spoke up next. "I've seen what happens when we let fear and distrust tear us apart. We need to stand together if we're going to make it through this." And so the survivors pledged themselves to the cause, their resolve steeled by the grim reality of their plight. With each passing day, they worked tirelessly to fortify their meager sanctuary, their hands toiling in unison to erect barricades and set traps to thwart the relentless advance of the infected horde. Yet even as they fought to secure their future, shadows of doubt lingered on the fringes of their consciousness. Whispers of dissent echoed through the makeshift camp, sowing seeds of discord among the weary survivors. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape, the survivors huddled around the dwindling campfire, their faces drawn and weary from another day of relentless struggle. Tension hung heavy in the air, a palpable reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of their makeshift sanctuary. Sarah gazed into the flickering flames, her thoughts drifting to the distant past, to a time when the world was still whole and the future seemed limitless. But the memories that once brought her solace now only served to deepen the ache of loss that gnawed at her soul. John sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The weight of his past hung heavy upon his shoulders, a burden he could never fully escape. He had fought battles both on the battlefield and within the depths of his mind, but the scars remained, a constant reminder of the price of survival. Emily, the youngest among them, fidgeted nervously, her gaze darting from face to face as if searching for reassurance in the eyes of her companions. She had known little of the world before the plague. Her memories of a life untouched by sorrow were now nothing more than fleeting whispers in the recesses of her mind. David, ever the stoic leader, surveyed the group with a mixture of concern and determination. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with peril, that their journey was far from over. But he also knew that they were stronger together, that their unity was their greatest weapon against the encroaching darkness. "We cannot afford to dwell on the past," David spoke, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. We must focus on the present, on what lies before us. Sarah nodded in agreement, her gaze lingering on the flames as if searching for answers in their dancing light. But how can we move forward when the past weighs so heavily upon us? John clenched his fists, his jaw set in a determined line. We move forward because we have no other choice. We may carry the scars of our past, but they do not define us. We are survivors, and we will not be defeated by the shadows that haunt us. Emily, emboldened by John's words, spoke up for the first time since their conversation began. I may not remember much of the world before, but I know that we are stronger together than we are apart. We may not have chosen this path, but we can choose how we walk it. Amidst their serious conversation, there were subtle exchanges of humor and tension beneath the surface. Sarah shot a playful smirk at John. Hey John, remember the time you tripped over that abandoned bicycle and nearly got us all eaten? John rolled his eyes, but a hint of a smile played at the corners of his lips. Oh, don't even start. I had that situation under control. Meanwhile, Emily stole glances at David, her cheeks flushing slightly whenever their eyes met. David, ever the composed leader, returned her gaze with a small smile, his own emotions carefully concealed beneath a mask of stoicism. And so, as the night stretched on and the fire burned low, the survivors found solace in each other's presence, drawing strength from the bonds that held them together. For in the darkness of their pasts, they found the light of hope, a beacon to guide them through the trials that lay ahead. As they settled in for the night, the stars twinkling overhead like distant memories of a time long gone, they knew that no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them together. And so they slept, their dreams filled with visions of a future free from the shadows of the past, a future where hope reigned eternally and the light of dawn banished the darkness once and for all. Chapter 3. The Night of the Horde. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the barren landscape, the survivors settled into an uneasy sleep. But amidst the stillness of the night, whispers of uncertainty lingered in the air, weaving their way through the fabric of dreams and stirring dormant fears. Sarah tossed and turned in her makeshift bedroll, her mind plagued by memories of lives lost and dreams shattered. The weight of responsibility pressed down upon her like a leaden blanket, threatening to suffocate her with its relentless burden. John lay awake beside her, his thoughts consumed by the specters of the past that haunted his every waking moment. He had fought too many battles and lost too many comrades to ever truly find peace in the quiet of the night. Emily slept fitfully nearby, her dreams troubled by visions of a world she could barely remember, a world she feared she would never truly understand. And David, ever vigilant, stood watch over his sleeping companions, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his mind racing with thoughts of the uncertain future that lay ahead. As the hours wore on and the night deepened, a sense of foreboding settled over the camp like a shroud. Shadows danced in the moonlight, twisting and writhing with a life of their own, casting eerie shapes upon the ground. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the night, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps drawing closer and closer. The survivors bolted upright, their hearts pounding with dread as they realized they were surrounded. "We've got company," John whispered, his voice tense with urgency. Sarah nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. "Stay together and watch each other's backs." Emily clung to David's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What should we do?" David's jaw clenched with determination as he scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. "We fight. We can't afford to let our guard down, not for a moment." Just then, the horde descended upon the camp, their blood-curdling cries piercing the night air. The survivors sprang into action, their weapons clutched tightly in their trembling hands as they fought for their lives. In the chaos that ensued, Jake, beloved member of their group, was caught off guard and overwhelmed by the infected. His screams echoed through the night, a haunting reminder of the brutal reality they faced. "We have to keep fighting," Sarah shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the horde. But as the minutes stretched into an eternity, hope began to fade, replaced by a grim acceptance of their fate. Just when all seemed lost, a deafening roar pierced the night air, accompanied by the thunderous roar of a motorcycle engine. A lone figure clad in tattered military gear tore through the horde like a whirlwind of death, his weapon flashing in the moonlight as he mowed down the infected with ruthless precision. With each swing of his blade, the tide of battle turned, the infected falling back before the onslaught of their newfound adversary. The survivors rallied to his side, emboldened by his bravery and determination, fighting with renewed vigor as they pushed back against the relentless onslaught. As the last of the infected fell to the ground, the survivors gathered around their savior, their faces awash with gratitude and relief. "Who are you?" John asked, his voice filled with awe. The figure removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face lined with scars. "The name's Marcus," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I've been traveling the land, trying to make things right." Chapter 4. The Quest for a Cure. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, bathing the land in a warm embrace, the survivors gathered around Marcus, their faces filled with a newfound sense of hope. His arrival had been a blessing in their darkest hour, a beacon of strength and determination in a world consumed by chaos. "Marcus, you mentioned something about finding a vaccine," David said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Do you know where we can find it?" Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "There's a research facility not too far from here. I've heard rumors that they were close to developing a vaccine before the outbreak." Sarah's eyes widened with hope. "Do you think they might still have some samples left?" Marcus shrugged, his expression grim. "It's hard to say, but it's our best shot at finding a cure." John stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go get that vaccine." The survivors nodded in agreement, their resolve steeled by the prospect of a cure. With Marcus leading the way, they set out on their journey, their footsteps echoing through the silent streets as they made their way toward the research facility. As they traveled, they encountered countless dangers along the way: infected hordes, treacherous terrain, and rival survivor groups vying for control of the land. But through it all, they remained united, their determination unwavering in the face of adversity. Finally, after days of travel and hardship, they arrived at their destination, a sprawling complex nestled deep within the mountains. The facility loomed before them, its imposing walls a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. "We'll need to split up and search the facility," Marcus said, his voice low with urgency. "The vaccine could be anywhere, and we can't afford to waste any time." The survivors nodded in agreement, their hearts pounding with anticipation as they prepared to enter the facility. With weapons drawn and senses heightened, they ventured into the darkness, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors as they searched for any sign of the elusive vaccine. Hours turned into days as they scoured every inch of the facility, their hope dwindling with each passing moment. But just when it seemed that all hope was lost, Sarah stumbled upon a locked door at the end of a long hallway. "Over here!" she called out, her voice tinged with excitement. The survivors rushed to her side, their hearts pounding with anticipation as Sarah worked to unlock the door. With a click, the door swung open, revealing a small laboratory illuminated by a dim overhead light. And there, on a table in the center of the room, sat vials of what appeared to be a potential vaccine, a glimmer of hope in a world consumed by darkness. "We found it," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. With trembling hands, Sarah carefully collected the vials, her heart racing with the possibility of a cure. But as she turned to leave, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the facility, freezing them in their tracks. The survivors spun around to see a horde of infected pouring into the laboratory, their rotting flesh and gaping maws a terrifying sight to behold. With no time to spare, the survivors fought for their lives, their weapons slicing through flesh and bone with brutal efficiency. Blood sprayed across the walls as the survivors battled against the relentless onslaught, their screams mingling with the guttural growls of the infected. Limbs were torn asunder, organs spilled onto the floor, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. But despite their best efforts, the survivors were outnumbered, the infected closing in on them from all sides. Just when all seemed lost, Marcus spotted a ventilation shaft near the ceiling, a slim chance at escape in the face of certain death. "Up there," he shouted, pointing towards the shaft. With adrenaline coursing through their veins, the survivors scrambled up into the shaft, their hearts pounding with fear as they narrowly escaped the clutches of the infected horde below. As they crawled through the darkness, their minds reeled with the horrors they had witnessed, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and despair. But amidst the chaos, a glimmer of hope remained. The vaccine they had risked everything to obtain, a beacon of light in a world consumed by darkness. As they emerged from the depths of the facility, their bodies battered and bruised, but their spirits unbroken, they knew that their journey was far from over. Chapter 1. Veiled Shadows. The morning light filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled patterns on the worn faces of the survivors huddled within the camp's perimeter. Nathan stood amidst them, his gaze scanning the gathered faces with practiced ease. To most, he was the beacon of hope in a world overrun by despair, a leader who had guided them through the darkest times. But to those who knew him, his facade was a thin veil concealing the darkness that lurked within. "Morning, everyone," Nathan's voice carried across the camp, its tone warm and reassuring. "We've got work to do today, but first, let's hear from anyone who's got something to say." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd as Nathan opened the floor to discussion. It was a routine they had grown accustomed to, a semblance of democracy in a world where power often lay in the hands of the ruthless. "I reckon we need to start expanding our patrols," one of the older survivors spoke up, his voice tinged with concern. "There's been more activity out there lately, and I don't like the sound of it." Nathan nodded, his expression grave. "I hear you, Bill. We'll send out some scouting parties first thing tomorrow. Safety's our top priority, after all." The words were spoken with sincerity, but those who knew Nathan best could see the calculating gleam in his eyes. Safety was indeed a priority, but not at the expense of his agenda. As the meeting drew to a close, Nathan made his rounds through the camp, exchanging pleasantries and offering words of encouragement to those in need. It was a performance he had perfected over the years, a mask he wore to conceal his true intentions. But as the day wore on and the sun dipped below the horizon, the facade began to crack. A survivor from a neighboring camp arrived at their doorstep, his face etched with fear and desperation. "Please," the man begged, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming for us. We need somewhere safe to hide." Nathan's smile never wavered as he welcomed the newcomer into the fold, but his eyes betrayed a coldness that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to meet his gaze. "We'll take care of you," he promised, his voice honeyed with false sincerity. "You're safe here with us." Chapter 2. Fractured Loyalties. As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in Nathan's carefully constructed facade began to widen. Dissent simmered beneath the surface of the camp like a dormant volcano on the verge of eruption. Yet still, Nathan clung to the illusion of control, refusing to acknowledge the growing unrest that threatened to tear his group apart. "Something ain't right," Sarah muttered under her breath as she watched Nathan address the group at their daily meeting. "I can feel it in my bones." Beside her, Jake nodded in agreement, his eyes dark with suspicion. "He's been acting strange lately, keeping secrets, making deals behind our backs. I don't trust him, not one bit." The sentiment was echoed by others in the group, their whispers of doubt spreading like wildfire through the ranks. But fear kept them silent, fear of reprisal, of being cast out into the unforgiving wilderness that lay beyond the safety of the camp. As Nathan spoke of unity and strength, his words rang hollow in the ears of those who had begun to see through his facade. His promises of safety felt like nothing more than empty platitudes, a desperate attempt to cling to power in the face of mounting opposition. Yet still, some remained loyal to Nathan, blinded by their desperation for security in a world gone mad. They clung to his every word, willing to overlook the atrocities he committed in the name of survival. But even they could not ignore the truth forever. As the days passed and the tensions within the camp reached a boiling point, Nathan's grip on power began to falter. Accusations flew, alliances shifted, and old wounds were reopened as the fragile bonds that held them together began to unravel. In the shadows, Nathan watched with growing unease as his carefully constructed empire crumbled around him. His hold on the group was slipping, his once loyal followers turning against him one by one. But still, he refused to go down without a fight. Nathan knew that in their world there was no room for weakness. Survival was a ruthless game, and he would do whatever it took to come out on top, even if it meant sacrificing everything he held dear. And so, as the sun set on another day in the apocalypse, Nathan braced himself for the inevitable showdown that lay ahead. Chapter 3. Betrayals Echo. The tension in the camp was palpable as whispers of mutiny swept through the ranks like wildfire. Nathan could feel the eyes of his followers upon him, their gazes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. Yet still he refused to show weakness, to let them see the doubt that gnawed at his insides like a hungry beast. "We can't keep living like this," Sarah's voice cut through the air like a knife, her words heavy with accusation. "We need to take action before it's too late." Nathan's jaw tightened at the challenge, his resolve hardening like steel. "And what do you suggest we do, Sarah? Turn on each other like animals? That's not the way to survive in this world." But Sarah was undeterred, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Maybe not, but blindly following your orders isn't the answer either. We need to stand up for ourselves, to fight for what's right." The sentiment was met with murmurs of agreement from the crowd, their once unwavering loyalty to Nathan beginning to waver. He could feel their resolve slipping through his fingers like grains of sand, and it filled him with a cold, gnawing dread. "We can't let him continue to lead us down this path," Jake spoke up, his voice ringing out clear and steady. "It's time we took matters into our own hands." Nathan's heart hammered in his chest as he watched his followers turn against him, their once united front fractured beyond repair. He had known that this day would come, and had felt it lurking on the horizon like a storm waiting to break. But still, it pained him to see the betrayal etched on their faces, to know that the trust he had worked so hard to build had been shattered in an instant. He had thought that he was doing what was necessary to keep them safe, to ensure their survival in a world gone mad. But now, as he stood on the brink of losing everything he held dear, Nathan couldn't help but wonder if perhaps he had been wrong all along. If perhaps his actions had been driven not by a desire to protect his people, but by a selfish need for power and control. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp, Nathan knew that the time for reckoning had come. The choices he had made and the lives he had sacrificed all led to this moment of truth. Chapter 4. Shadows of Conflict. The camp crackled with tension, the air heavy with the weight of impending conflict. Nathan stood at the center of the gathering, his back straight, his gaze unwavering despite the storm brewing around him. He could feel the eyes of his former allies boring into him like daggers, their anger and betrayal palpable in the air. "We trusted you," Sarah's voice rang out, sharp and accusing. "We followed you, believed in you, and this is how you repay us, by sacrificing us like lambs to the slaughter." Nathan's jaw tightened at the accusation, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "I did what needed to be done to keep us alive," he insisted, his voice strained with emotion. "I made the tough choices so that we could survive in this hellish world." "But at what cost?" Jake's voice cut through the air like a whip, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "At the cost of our humanity? Our decency? Is that what it takes to survive in your world, Nathan? Sacrificing everything that makes us human?" The word struck a chord deep within Nathan's soul, stirring a sense of doubt and self-loathing that he had long tried to bury. Had he become the very thing he despised? A monster masquerading as a savior, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve his goals? "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the clamor of the crowd. "I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that all we are is animals, fighting tooth and nail for survival." But even as the words left his lips, Nathan knew that the truth was far more complicated than he dared to admit. He had seen the darkness that lurked within his own heart, the cold, calculating pragmatism that had driven him to commit unspeakable acts in the name of survival. And now, as he stood on the precipice of oblivion, Nathan realized that there was no turning back. The choices he had made and the lives he had taken all led to this moment of reckoning. He could no longer hide behind the facade of the benevolent leader, for his sins had been laid bare for all to see. The crowd grew restless. They started to move towards Nathan. Just then someone screams in the background. A horde of zombies starts to attack the camp. Chapter 5. The Reign of Darkness. The moon hung like a silent witness in the sky, its pale light casting eerie shadows over the blood-soaked battleground that was once the survivors' camp. Nathan moved among the chaos, his every step calculated, his gaze sharp and unyielding as he surveyed the carnage that surrounded him. Sarah's eyes met Nathan's for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them amidst the chaos of battle. They fought side by side, their previous conflicts forgotten in the face of the greater threat that loomed over them. But as the night wore on and the battle raged on, it became increasingly apparent that Nathan's intentions were far more sinister than anyone had realized. As the undead closed in around them, he seized the opportunity to strike. "Sarah, watch out!" Nathan's voice cut through the din of battle, but it was too late. A lone zombie lurched forward, its decaying hands reaching out to grab her from behind. Before anyone could react, Nathan drew a gun from his waistband, his expression cold and unyielding as he aimed at Sarah's unsuspecting back. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos, "but I can't let you stand in my way." The gunshot rang out like a death knell in the night, the sound of betrayal reverberating through the camp as Sarah crumpled to the ground, her lifeless eyes staring up at the moonlit sky. Nathan stood over her fallen form, his hands trembling with the weight of what he had done. "This is how it has to be," he muttered, his voice filled with a chilling certainty. "For the good of the camp, for the good of us all." But as the survivors looked on in horror, Nathan's true intentions became clear. With a ruthless determination, he proclaimed himself the new ruler of the camp, his voice ringing out with authority as he laid down the law. "From now on," he declared, his words carrying the weight of finality, "anyone who dares to oppose me will suffer the same fate as Sarah. There will be no mercy, no second chances. Obedience will be rewarded, and disobedience will be punished with death." The survivors watched in stunned silence as Nathan turned to those who had once stood by his side, his eyes burning with malice as he ordered them to round up those who had dared to defy him. In a gruesome display of power, he had them executed before the horrified eyes of the remaining survivors, their screams of agony echoing into the night as the darkness of the new world they lived in descended upon them like a shroud. And as Nathan stood amidst the carnage, his heart blackened by the horrors he had unleashed, he knew that there would be no turning back. In a world consumed by darkness, only the ruthless would prevail, and he intended to rule with an iron fist, no matter the cost. Chapter 6. The Reign of Terror. In the deep silence that followed the tumult of battle, whispers that had once sparked an uprising now lay as silent as the defeated. The survivors, weary and wounded, gathered in the shadow of their shattered lives, their defiance turned to ash as they confronted the price of their rebellion. Nathan stood amidst the wreckage of the camp, the dawn's early light casting long shadows over the scene of carnage. His followers, diminished but unbowed, assembled around him, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, respect, and the unspoken question of what was to come. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on debris, and addressed the remnants of his once thriving community. "You thought to challenge me," Nathan began, his voice cutting through the morning chill like a blade. "You believed that in your whispers and your plots, you would find strength enough to overthrow me." A pause hung in the air, heavy with the memory of the night's violence. Then from the crowd, a voice, ragged but defiant, dared to interrupt the silence. "We fought for freedom, for a life free from your tyranny." Nathan turned to face the speaker, a cold smile creeping across his face. "Freedom?" he echoed, the word dripping with contempt. "Look around you. See the fruits of your freedom. You have only succeeded in destroying what we had." He gestured to the ruins that surrounded them, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his people. "But know this," Nathan continued, his voice rising in a crescendo of power. "I am not your enemy. The world outside, that unforgiving darkness, that is our true foe, and only united under my leadership can we hope to survive it." A hush fell over the crowd as they absorbed his words, the truth of their situation settling heavy on their hearts. Nathan seized the moment, his voice now softer, more persuasive. "We have lost much, yes, but as long as we stand together, we are not defeated. I will rebuild what was lost, and I will make us stronger than before. This This was but a test of our resolve. He extended a hand, not in supplication, but as a commander to his troops, an offer of reconciliation and unity. "Join me," he said, "and let us forge a new future from the ashes of our past." The silence that followed was pregnant with decision. Then slowly, one by one, the survivors stepped forward, placing their hands atop Nathan's. In that moment, an unspoken covenant was forged, a commitment to a future dictated by strength, ruthlessness, and an unyielding will to survive. As Nathan looked over the sea of faces before him, his smile widened, not a smile of warmth, but one of ambition, of plans unfurling like the dark wings of destiny. In the quiet dawn, amidst the ruins of his domain, Nathan had secured his reign once more. But the cost of victory lay heavy on the land, a somber reminder that in this world consumed by darkness, survival demanded sacrifices no one was prepared to make. And so, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the gloom, casting a pallid light over the devastated camp, Nathan's voice once again rose above the silence, a harbinger of the new order that would rise from the chaos. "We will rebuild," he declared, "and we will emerge stronger. For in this new world, only the strong can claim freedom. And I," he concluded, his gaze fierce and unyielding, "I will lead us into that future." Thanks for joining us at Survival Horror Ambience. If you like horror stories, subscribe and like the video. Give us any of your horror ideas, we may work them into a scary tale. Until next time, have a scary night.